The scratching woke me around midnight, faint but insistent, like claws raking against wood. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe a raccoon digging through the trash again. I tried to ignore it, burying my head deeper into the pillow, but the sound persisted. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Finally, with a groan of frustration, I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Emily didn't stir, her soft snores steady and oblivious to the noise. I envied her ability to sleep through anything. Grabbing a flashlight from the drawer, I made my way to the back door, the cold hardwood floor sending a chill through my bare feet. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old boards beneath my weight. When I stepped outside, the crisp night air hit me, the scent of damp earth filling my nostrils. The scratching was louder now, coming from underneath the house. I crouched down near the crawl space, angling the flashlight into the darkness. At first, all I saw were cobwebs and dirt. Then, two glowing eyes reflected the light back at me. A dog. It was thin, its fur matted and dirty, and its body was half hidden behind a support beam. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, trying to sound non-threatening. The dog growled, a low, guttural warning that made me hesitate. "Easy," I murmured, reaching out slowly. The dog didn't move at first, just stared at me with those unblinking eyes. Then, faster than I could react, it lunged forward and sank its teeth into my hand. Pain shot through me as I yanked my hand back, blood already welling from the puncture wounds. "Damn it," I hissed, cradling my hand against my chest. The dog retreated into the shadows, growling softly. I stumbled back inside, kicking the door shut behind me. Under the kitchen light, the bite looked worse than I'd expected. Deep, angry red marks oozed blood, and my hand throbbed with each beat of my heart. Emily's footsteps on the stairs startled me. "What happened?" she asked, her eyes widening as she saw the blood. "Dog," I said shortly, grabbing a towel to wrap around my hand. "There's a stray under the house." She frowned, her concern genuine. "Do you need to go to the hospital?" "I'll be fine," I said, waving her off. But as I cleaned the wound, a thought nagged at the back of my mind. Why was the dog under the house in the first place? The next morning, I returned to the crawlspace. The dog was gone, but in its place, I found a small butcher's tag lying in the dirt. It was attached to a piece of frayed leather, likely from a broken collar. The tag read, "Tom's Prime Cuts, best in town." It was a local butcher shop, one I'd passed dozens of times, but never visited. Emily, however, had mentioned stopping there once or twice. I tucked the tag into my pocket, the wheels of my mind turning. Why was this dog from the butcher shop under my house? And why did its presence feel like more than a coincidence? Over breakfast, I watched Emily closely. She moved around the kitchen with the same ease she always did, pouring coffee and humming a tune I didn't recognize. But now, every move she made felt suspicious. "You said you've been to Tom's Prime Cuts, right?" I asked casually. She glanced at me, her expression neutral. "Yeah, a few times." "Why?" "Just wondering," I said, forcing a smile. Emily nodded, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Nervousness, maybe, or guilt. Or maybe I was just imagining things. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. That night, after Emily went to bed, I unlocked her phone. I'd never done it before, never had a reason to, but now, curiosity outweighed trust. I scrolled through her messages, finding nothing unusual at first. But then I saw a string of texts from an unsaved number. "Can't wait to see you again. Let me know when you're free. Last night was amazing." My heart sank as I stared at the messages, my chest tight with anger and disbelief. I wanted to wake her up right then and demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Fear of what she'd say. Fear of confirming what I already suspected. Or maybe it was pride. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under my skin. Instead, I put the phone back and lay awake, staring at the ceiling as questions swirled in my mind. Who was she texting? Was it someone from the butcher shop? Or was it someone else entirely? By morning, I had a plan. I wouldn't confront Emily. Not yet. I needed proof. Something undeniable that she couldn't explain away. And I knew where to start. Tom's Prime Cuts. Tom's Prime Cuts sat on the corner of Main and Oak, a a small, unassuming brick building with a striped awning and a neon open sign buzzing faintly in the window. I parked a block away, trying to shake the nervous energy buzzing in my chest. This was just a routine visit, I told myself. But deep down, I knew this was more than that. As I stepped inside, the sharp, tangy scent of raw meat hit me, mingling with the low hum of a refrigerator unit. The shop was small, with a long glass counter displaying cuts of beef, pork, and chicken. Behind the counter stood Tom Miller, the owner, his apron streaked with blood and his face lit up with a practiced smile. "Morning," he called, wiping his hands on a towel. "What can I get you?" I hesitated, scanning the shop for any sign of familiarity. Emily wasn't here, of course, but I couldn't help imagining her standing in this very spot, laughing at something Tom said, the two of them sharing a moment I wasn't part of. "I'm just looking," I said finally, my voice tight. Tom nodded, leaning on the counter. "First time here?" "Yeah," I admitted. "My wife's mentioned it a few times, so I figured I'd stop by." At the mention of Emily, Tom's expression shifted. Just for a moment. It was subtle, but there was a flicker of recognition, a spark of something that made my stomach twist. "She's a great customer," he said smoothly. "Always knows what she wants." The words felt loaded, though I couldn't pinpoint why. I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "That's Emily," I said. "Always on top of things." Tom chuckled, but it felt forced, his gaze lingering on me for a moment too long. As I left the shop, the knot in my stomach tightened. Tom's reaction had been too deliberate, his friendliness too rehearsed. He knew something. I was sure of it. The next day, I decided to follow Emily. It was a bold move, one I knew would backfire if she caught me, but I couldn't sit around waiting for answers to fall into my lap. She left the house around 2 p.m., her gym bag slung over her shoulder. "Yoga class," she said with a smile, kissing me on the cheek before heading out the door. I waited a few minutes before grabbing my keys and following her. She didn't go to the yoga studio. Instead, she drove straight to Tom's Prime Cuts. I parked a few spaces down, slouching in my seat as I watched her step inside. She didn't look around, didn't hesitate, just walked in like she belonged there. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, after 20 minutes, she emerged, her cheeks flushed and her smile wide. She carried a small bag, presumably with meat or groceries, but the way she held it, clutched tightly to her chest, felt significant. I followed her home, my mind racing with questions. Was it just a routine errand? Or was there something more to her visit? That evening, as Emily showered, I searched the kitchen for the bag she'd brought home. I found it tucked in the fridge, a simple white paper bag with a butcher shop's logo printed on the side. Inside were a few cuts of steak, neatly wrapped in wax paper, and a receipt tucked into the corner. The receipt seemed innocent enough at first, just a list of items and their prices. But at the bottom, written in blue ink, were the words, "See you next time, E." My heart sank as I stared at the note. It was personal, too familiar to be a standard message from a butcher to a customer. I slipped the receipt into my pocket, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. This was more than just a professional relationship. Later that night, as I sat on the back porch, nursing a beer and trying to piece everything together, I heard the familiar scratching sound again. The dog was back. I grabbed a flashlight and crouched by the crawl space, angling the light into the darkness. There it was, its glowing eyes staring back at me. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, my voice trembling. "What are you trying to tell me?" The dog growled, but didn't lunge this time. Instead, it nudged something forward with its nose, a crumpled piece of paper, dirty and torn. I reached for it cautiously, my fingers brushing the edge as the dog retreated into the shadows. Unfolding the paper, I saw a handwritten note scrawled in messy, hurried script. "You promised me." The word sent a chill down my spine. Who had written this? And why was it buried under my house? The next day, as Emily left for work, I decided to search her car. It was risky, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Under the driver's seat, I found it, a cheap, prepaid phone, the kind you buy to keep secrets. I powered it on, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the messages. Most were from an unsaved number, their contents vague but intimate. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. I miss you already." The final message was the most damning. "Meet me tomorrow at the shop. Usual time." My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. That night, as Emily slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Confronting her now would be easy, but it wouldn't get me the answers I needed. If she was meeting someone at the butcher shop, I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to know who he was. The next day, I prepared carefully. If Emily was meeting someone, I needed to catch her in the act. I left for work at the usual time, but instead of heading to the office, I parked my car 2 streets away and waited. Around 11 a.m., Emily left the house, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. Yoga again, she'd said that morning with a smile. I had forced myself to nod, my stomach twisting as she kissed my cheek. I followed her at a safe distance, my pulse racing as I tried to stay out of sight. Sure enough, she drove to Tom's Prime Cuts, parking in her usual spot near the entrance. I watched as she entered the shop, her steps quick and purposeful. My chest tightened as I waited, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Emily emerged 15 minutes later, but she wasn't alone. A man followed her out, his face obscured by a baseball cap and sunglasses. He wasn't Tom. They spoke briefly by her car, their body language close, but not overtly intimate. Still, there was something about the way they interacted, an ease of familiarity, that set my nerves on edge. As they parted, the man walked briskly to his own car and drove away. I followed him, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as I tried to keep a safe distance. The man drove across town to a small, nondescript warehouse on the edge of an industrial park. I parked a few spaces away, watching as he unlocked the door and disappeared inside. What was he doing here? And why was Emily meeting him? I waited for over an hour, but he didn't come back out. Frustrated, I jotted down the license plate number of his car and left, determined to find out who he was. That evening, as I sat on the back porch, trying to piece everything together, the mangy dog returned. Its presence had become almost routine, but this time, there was something different. The dog approached cautiously, its head low and its movements slow. I noticed a scrap of fabric tied loosely around its neck, a torn piece of a shirt, dirty and frayed. Curious, I untied it, my heart racing as I unfolded the cloth. Inside was another crumpled piece of paper, this one torn from a notebook. Scrawled across it in hurried handwriting were the words, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." My blood ran cold as I stared at the note. Who had written this? And how had it ended up with the dog? Later that night, I returned to the burned phone I'd found in Emily's car. Scrolling through the messages again, I noticed something I hadn't before. The texts weren't all from one person. Some of the messages referenced R. Others mentioned S. And a few were signed simply with a single initial, T. My chest tightened as I realized Emily wasn't just hiding one secret. She was hiding an entire web of deception. The next morning, I decided to confront Tom directly. I arrived at the butcher shop just as it opened, my chest tight with anticipation. Tom looked surprised to see me, his friendly demeanor faltering slightly. "Back so soon?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice firm. "About Emily." Tom's smile faded, and he glanced around the empty shop nervously. "What about her?" he asked cautiously. "I know something's going on," I said, stepping closer. "And I think you do too." Tom hesitated, his gaze dropping to the counter. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, slamming the receipt I'd found onto the counter. "This isn't just about me, Tom. Who wrote this?" Tom's face paled as he read the note, his hands trembling slightly. "I didn't write that," he said softly. "Then who did?" I demanded. Tom hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Look, I don't know everything," he admitted. "But I know Emily's been meeting someone. It's not me, I swear." "Who?" I pressed, my chest tight. Tom shook his head. "I don't know his name," he said. "But he comes by sometimes, usually late in the afternoon. They talk in the back." His confession sent a wave of anger and betrayal through me. "Why didn't you say anything?" I demanded. Tom hesitated, then shrugged helplessly. "It's not my business," he said. And honestly, I didn't want to get involved. His answer felt like a slap, but it was more than I'd had before. That evening, I sat in my car outside the yoga studio Emily claimed to attend. I watched as she entered the building, her gym bag slung over her shoulder. But instead of going to a class, she met someone in the lobby, a man in a baseball cap. The same man I'd followed to the warehouse. My chest tightened as I watched them talk, their conversation animated but too far away to hear. When they parted, Emily headed into the studio, and the man left. I followed him again, my mind racing with questions. The man returned to the same warehouse, disappearing inside just as he had before. But this time I didn't wait. I parked my car and approached the building, my heart pounding as I reached the door. I knocked once, twice, then pushed it open when no one answered. The inside was dimly lit, with stacks of boxes and equipment scattered around. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing. No response. But as I stepped further inside, I noticed something on a nearby table. A photograph of Emily. The photograph was old, slightly faded, but unmistakable. Emily stood in the center of the frame, her blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her radiant smile directed at someone just out of the shot. She looked younger. This wasn't recent. Next to the photograph was a crumpled note scrawled in the same hurried handwriting I'd seen before. "We have to be more careful." My chest tightened as I scanned the room for more clues. The walls were bare, the floor dusty, but the table held several items that made my stomach twist. A second photo of Emily, this time with her arm around a man whose face was torn from the picture. A small pile of receipts, some from Tom's Prime Cuts and others from the yoga studio. And a slip of paper with the initials RM. I didn't recognize the initials, but they felt significant. The room seemed empty, abandoned even, but everything here pointed to someone who had been watching Emily, and possibly me, for a long time. As I turned to leave, a shadow moved across the doorway. My heart leapt into my throat as I crouched behind a stack of boxes, my pulse pounding in my ears. A man entered, his features hidden by the dim light. He stopped near the table, his hands brushing over the items I'd just inspected. "Damn it, Emily," he muttered under his breath. The sound of her name hit me like a freight train. This was it, whoever he was, he knew her. I stayed hidden, my breath shallow as he gathered the items and stuffed them into a bag. Then he left, the door clicking shut behind him. Once the room was clear, I bolted for the exit, my mind racing. This wasn't just an affair. This was something deeper, something more calculated. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, humming softly as she chopped vegetables for dinner. She glanced up as I entered, her smile faltering at the sight of my expression. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone cautious. I didn't respond at first, dropping my keys onto the counter with a sharp clatter. "Where were you this afternoon?" I asked finally, my voice tight. Emily blinked, her hands stilling on the cutting board. "At yoga," she said slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Why?" I stepped closer, my chest tight with anger. "Don't lie to me, Emily," I said sharply. "I saw you. You weren't at yoga. You were meeting someone." Her face paled, and she set the knife down carefully. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I followed you," I said, my voice rising. "I saw you meet that man, and I saw the warehouse." Emily's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for a response. "What are you hiding?" I demanded, slamming my hand on the counter. "Who is he?" Her tears spilled over as she shook her head. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice breaking. "Then tell me what it is," I snapped. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her refusal felt like a slap, and I turned away, my fists clenched. "Then you leave me no choice," I said coldly. The next morning, I went back to Tom's Prime Cuts. Tom looked startled to see me, his friendly demeanor replaced with a nervous energy. "Morning," he said cautiously. "What can I do for you?" "I need answers," I said firmly. "About Emily, and about the man she's meeting." Tom hesitated, glancing around the empty shop before gesturing for me to follow him into the back. "Look," he said once we were alone, his voice low. "I don't know the guy's name, but I've seen him with Emily a few times. He's not from around here." "Then who is he?" I pressed. Tom sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All I know is he works with Ryan. You know, the guy who co-owns the shop with me." My chest tightened at the mention of Ryan. He'd always been friendly, always quick with a joke or a handshake. Could he really be involved in this? That evening, I went to Ryan's house. He opened the door with a smile, his expression faltering slightly when he saw me. "Hey, Ethan," he said, his tone cautious. "What brings you here?" "I need to talk to you," I said firmly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Ryan closed the door behind me, his movements slow and deliberate. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice measured. "It's about Emily," I said, my eyes narrowing. "And about the man she's been meeting." Ryan's face paled, his smile disappearing completely. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, stepping closer. "I've seen him. I've seen the warehouse. And I know you're involved." For a moment, Ryan said nothing, his jaw tightening as he avoided my gaze. Then he sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said finally. "I'll tell you what I know, but you're not going to like it." His words sent a chill through me, the weight of his confession settling over me like a stone. According to Ryan, the man Emily had been meeting was someone she'd known for years, a connection from her past that she'd kept hidden. "He came to me first," Ryan admitted, his voice low. "Said he needed help getting back in touch with her. I didn't think much of it at the time." "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Ryan hesitated, then shook his head. "It's not my place to say," he said softly. His refusal only fueled my anger, but before I could press further, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "If you want the truth, meet me at the warehouse. Midnight." As I left Ryan's house, my mind raced. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. The truth was finally within reach. But was I ready to face it? The warehouse loomed in the darkness, its silhouette sharp against the faint glow of the moon. I parked my car a block away, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. My chest tightened with anticipation and dread. Who had sent the text? Was this a trap? Or would this finally give me the answers I so desperately needed? The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the empty space. Inside, the air was cold, carrying the faint scent of oil and rust. A single light bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a pale glow over the otherwise shadowy room. "Hello," I called, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, footsteps echoed from the far corner, slow and deliberate. The man stepped into the light, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. It was the same man I'd followed from the butcher shop, the one Emily had been meeting. "Who are you?" I demanded, my fists clenched at my sides. He removed his cap, revealing sharp features and piercing blue eyes. "My name's Richard," he said simply, "and I'm here to tell you the truth about your wife." According to Richard, he and Emily had been connected long before I ever entered the picture. They'd met during her college years, and he claimed they'd been inseparable for a time. "She was the love of my life," he said, his tone wistful. "And I was hers. But life got in the way. She chose a different path, one that didn't include me." His words made my chest tighten. Was this the man Emily had been texting? The man she'd been meeting in secret? And now? I asked sharply, "What is she to you now?" Richard hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I thought we could pick up where we left off," he admitted. "But it's complicated. She's not the same person she was back then. And neither am I." His vague answers only fueled my anger. "Why the games?" I demanded. "The notes, the phone, the warehouse, why all the secrecy?" Richard sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It wasn't just me," he said softly. "There were others involved." My chest tightened at his words. "Others?" I repeated. "What the hell are you talking about?" Richard hesitated, then nodded. "Ryan, Tom, even Sandra." "Sandra?" I asked, my voice rising. "Tom's wife." Richard nodded again. "They all knew. They helped cover for her when she needed it. They thought they were protecting her, but really, they were just protecting themselves." His words hit like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about Emily's betrayal. It was about the people around me, the ones I'd trusted, working together to keep me in the dark. As Richard spoke, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Emily's frequent visits to the butcher shop, the yoga classes that never seemed to add up, the cryptic messages. All of it was part of a carefully constructed web of deception. But why? What were they hiding? Why did she do it? I asked finally, my voice trembling. What was she running from? Richard hesitated, his expression pained. "She wasn't running," he said softly. "She was looking for something. Something she lost a long time ago." His cryptic answer sent a chill down my spine. "What does that mean?" I demanded. Richard didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is the last thing she wrote to me," he said, handing it to me. Maybe it'll help you understand. The letter. The paper was worn, the edges frayed from being handled too often. As I unfolded it, my hands trembled. The letter was short, written in Emily's neat handwriting. Richard, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I feel like I'm drowning in a life that doesn't feel like mine. I thought I could leave the past behind, but it keeps pulling me back. Maybe it's because I never got closure. Or maybe it's because I still have feelings I don't want to admit. I don't know. But thank you for being there when I needed someone. Emily. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. She wasn't just betraying me. She was lost, confused, and I had been too blind to see it. When I got home, Emily was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of guilt and fear. "Where were you?" she asked softly. I didn't respond. Instead, I dropped the letter onto the coffee table in front of her. Her eyes widened as she recognized it, her hands trembling as she picked it up. "Richard gave me this," I said, my voice cold. "He told me everything." Emily's tears spilled over as she set the letter down, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know how to tell you." "Tell me what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "That you've been sneaking around with another man? That you've been lying to me for months?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly. "I never meant for it to go this far." Her words felt like a slap, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a stone. "What do you want from me, Emily?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What the hell do you want?" Her tears fell harder as she looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt and desperation. "I want to fix this," she said softly. "I want to fix us." Her words sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me. Anger, heartbreak, and a faint glimmer of hope all collided, leaving me unsure of what to say. "I don't know if that's possible," I said finally, my voice trembling. Emily nodded, her tears spilling over. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "Just tell me how to make it right." Her plea felt like a lifeline, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. "I need time," I said, turning away. And for the first time in months, Emily didn't argue. The house was quiet after our conversation, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but charged, like the air before a storm. Emily retreated upstairs, and I stayed in the living room, staring at the letter she'd left on the table. The words on the page blurred in my mind, mingling with everything Richard had told me, everything I'd seen. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was chaos, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was a carousel of questions and fragmented answers that didn't fit together. Richard's cryptic confession, the mysterious notes, the dog, the web of people around Emily who had kept her secrets, it all pointed to something deeper than I was prepared for. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still missing something, the final piece of the puzzle that would make sense of it all. The next morning, I decided to confront Ryan. I couldn't let his vague admissions the night before go unanswered. He was hiding something big, and I wasn't going to let him dodge me again. When I showed up at his house, he looked surprised but not entirely caught off guard. It was as if he'd been expecting me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Ryan nodded slowly, stepping aside to let me in. "I figured you'd be back," he said. "I was just waiting for you to put the pieces together." I followed him into his kitchen, where he poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if I wanted one. He handed me a mug, his expression unreadable, and gestured for me to sit. "I'm done with riddles," I said, setting the coffee down untouched. "You know something about what's been going on with Emily. I need you to tell me the truth." Ryan sighed, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his temple. "I'll tell you," he said finally. "But you're not going to like it." "Try me," I said, my patience fraying. Ryan took a deep breath before speaking. "It's about Richard," he said, "and about Emily. What you need to understand is that this didn't start recently. It's been going on for years." The knot in my stomach tightened. "Years," I repeated, my voice cracking. Ryan nodded. "Richard was Emily's first love. You probably guessed that by now. But what you don't know is that he never really let her go. Even after she married you, he kept finding ways to insert himself into her life. At first, it was subtle, sending her letters, emails, things like that. But when he came back to town, it escalated." I clenched my fists, my chest tightening as I tried to process what he was saying. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She was scared," Ryan said simply. "Scared you wouldn't understand." And honestly, I think she was scared of her own feelings, too. I stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. You knew about this, I said accusingly. You helped her hide it. Ryan didn't deny it. I did, he admitted. But not for the reasons you think. I wasn't trying to hurt you, Ethan. I was trying to protect her. Protect her from what? I demanded. From Richard, Ryan said, his voice low. He's not the man you think he is. He's obsessive, controlling. He wouldn't let her go, no matter how many times she tried to break things off. His words sent a chill down my spine. What are you saying? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying he's dangerous, Ryan said. And if you want to save your marriage, you need to confront him. Once and for all. That night, I drove back to the warehouse. The thought of facing Richard again filled me with dread, but I couldn't ignore what Ryan had said. If Richard was as dangerous as he claimed, I needed to put an end to this before it spiraled out of control. When I arrived, the warehouse was dark and silent, just as it had been the night before. I pushed the door open cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Richard, I called, my voice echoing in the empty space. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, footsteps echoed from the shadows, slow and deliberate. Richard emerged from the darkness, his expression calm but cold. Ethan, he said, his tone measured. I was wondering when you'd come back. I clenched my fists, taking a step closer. I know what you've been doing, I said, my voice trembling with anger. You've been manipulating Emily, stalking her, trying to tear us apart. Richard's lips curled into a faint smile. Is that what Ryan told you? He asked. Of course, he'd say that. It's convenient, isn't it? Blame everything on me and ignore the real problem. What are you talking about? I demanded. The real problem, Richard said, his voice steady, is that Emily's been unhappy for a long time. And you didn't notice. You were too wrapped up in your own world to see what was happening right in front of you. His words cut deep, the truth in them more painful than I wanted to admit. But I refused to let him shift the blame entirely onto me. That doesn't excuse what you've done, I said. You had no right to interfere in our lives. Richard's smile faded, his expression hardening. You think I wanted this? He asked, his voice rising. You think I enjoyed watching her suffer, knowing she'd never be happy with you? I didn't ask for this, Ethan, but I couldn't stand by and do nothing. The room felt suffocating, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a stone. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to the tangled mess of truth and lies. I'm done playing your games, I said finally, my voice cold. Stay away from Emily. Stay away from us. This ends now. Richard's eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue. You're making a mistake, he said softly. Maybe, I said, but it's mine to make. When I returned home, Emily was waiting for me, her face pale and tear-streaked. She stood as I entered, her hands trembling as she reached for me. Ethan, she said softly, I know I've hurt you, and I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I want to try. I want to fix this. Her words were earnest, but they weren't enough to erase the pain. I don't know if I can trust you again, I said honestly, my voice breaking. Emily nodded, her tears falling harder. I'll do whatever it takes, she said.